I stared at Jake in disbelief, the papers he'd slammed on the counter feeling like a physical blow. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my efforts to remain calm. Sarah smirked from the doorway. "It's pretty simple, Laura. This house belongs to Kyle and me now. You're being evicted." "Evicted?" I echoed, my mind racing. How could this be happening? This was my home, the home I'd poured my heart and soul into building with Jake after we married 15 years ago. Jake's expression was cold, devoid of the warmth I'd once seen in his eyes. "The deed is in our name now. You have 30 days to get out." Anger flared within me, burning away the initial shock. "You can't do this," I cried, rounding on him. "This house was my dream, my life's work, after everything I sacrificed to make this happen for us." "For us?" Jake cut me off with a harsh laugh. "Don't delude yourself, Laura. This was always about you and your selfish desires." But the words stung like a slap to the face. Selfish? I was the one who'd worked tirelessly to build my kimono dressing business from the ground up, all so we could have a comfortable life together. While Jake spent his days golfing and gambling, I was the one bringing in a steady income, saving every penny to make our dream home a reality. Sarah's snide voice broke through my thoughts. "Listen to your husband, Laura. It's time for you to move on and let the next generation take over." I opened my mouth to protest, but the smug looks on their faces stopped me cold. In that moment, I realized the truth. They'd been plotting this for who knows how long, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Well, if they thought I was going down without a fight, they had another thing coming. "Fine," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "I'll go. For now." I met Jake's gaze, letting the fire in my eyes convey the message he'd regret this betrayal. As I turned and walked away, Sarah's mocking laughter followed me out. But I didn't care. A plan was already forming in my mind, a plan that would make them pay for every ounce of pain and humiliation they'd caused me. They wanted to play dirty? I'd show them just how dirty I could get. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and by the time I was done, they'd be left out in the cold with nothing. I sat on the couch in Megan and Eric's living room, staring blankly at the muted TV. My body was there, but my mind kept replaying the events of the past 24 hours like a broken record. "Mom?" Megan's voice pulled me from my thoughts. She settled beside me, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay?" I forced a weak smile. "I'm fine, honey, just processing everything." "I can't believe Dad and Sarah did this," she said, shaking her head. "Kicking you out of your own home? That's low, even for them." Anger flashed in her eyes, and I was reminded of just how protective Megan had always been of me, especially after her father walked out when she was just a kid. She'd been my rock through those tough times, and I had a feeling I'd be leaning on her strength again in the days to come. I should have seen it coming, I admitted, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. The signs were there, Jake's constant business trips, the way he and Sarah would whisper behind closed doors. I just didn't want to believe they could be so cruel. Megan reached over and squeezed my hand. "We'll figure this out, Mom, I promise. They're not going to get away with treating you like this." Her determination was reassuring, but a part of me still felt lost, adrift in a sea of betrayal. This wasn't just about losing my home. It was about having the rug pulled out from under me by the people I'd trusted most in this world. I keep running it over and over in my mind, I confessed. All the times Jake promised we were building this house for our future, for our family. And now... I trailed off, blinking back tears. "Now we know it was all a lie," Megan finished, her jaw set in a hard line. "But we're going to make them pay for every single one of those lies, Mom. I swear it." I studied her for a moment, seeing the fire in her eyes that had always been my source of strength. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to stop wallowing and start fighting back. "You're right," I said, straightening my shoulders. "We can't let them get away with this. Not after everything I sacrificed to give us a good life." Megan nodded, a determined gleam in her eye. "Exactly. So what's our first move?" I thought for a moment, then smiled, a slow, predatory grin that would have made even Jake shudder. "First, we find out exactly what your dear old dad and that snake Sarah have been up to behind my back, and then..." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Then we make them regret the day they ever crossed me." As I laid out the beginnings of my plan, I could feel the shadows of doubt and hurt receding. In their place, a bright, burning flame of vengeance took hold, and I knew Jake and Sarah were going to get burned. "I can't believe what I'm seeing," Megan muttered, staring at the computer screen in disbelief. "Dad has been siphoning money from your business accounts for years." I leaned closer, my heart pounding as I took in the financial records she'd uncovered. Canceled checks, wire transfers, mysterious cash withdrawals. It was all laid out in black and white, a twisted web of deceit that made me feel sick to my stomach. "That lying, cheating snake," I spat, clenching my fists. All those times he claimed the business was struggling, that we needed to tighten our belts, he was robbing me blind the whole time. Megan shook her head slowly. "It gets worse, Mom. Look at these credit card statements." She clicked over to a new window, and my jaw dropped as I scanned the charges. Designer clothes, lavish vacations, even a brand new sports car. He bought all of that with my hard-earned money? I could barely process the depths of Jake's betrayal. How could he do this to me, to our family? "Because he's a selfish, greedy bastard who only cares about himself," Megan snarled, an uncharacteristic venom in her voice. "And it looks like Sarah was in on the whole thing." She gestured to a series of emails, detailing shady financial dealings and coded messages about covering their tracks. My stomach churned as I read through them, the truth sinking in with each damning line. "They've been playing us for fools all along," I realized, my voice hollow. "Everything, the house, the business, our entire life together, it was all built on lies." For a moment, the anger and hurt threatened to consume me. I could feel the familiar sting of tears pricking my eyes as years of memories were tainted by this harsh new reality. But then I caught sight of Megan's expression, jaw set, eyes blazing with righteous fury, and a different kind of fire ignited within me. "You know what?" I said, straightening my shoulders. "I'm done crying over those two snakes. It's time we took the fight to them." Megan's lips curved into a predatory grin. "I was hoping you'd say that. What did you have in mind?" A plan was already taking shape, one that would hit Jake and Sarah where it hurt most, their reputations, their social standing, their entire carefully constructed facade of respectability. "We're going to expose them for the liars and thieves they really are," I declared, feeling a rush of vindictive glee. "Let's see how smug they are when the whole world knows what kind of people they truly are." Megan nodded, her expression fierce. "Consider it done, Mom. Those two are going to wish they never messed with us." As we dove back into the evidence, plotting our next move, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. Jake and Sarah had made a grave mistake in underestimating me, and by the time I was through with them, they'd be the ones left with nothing. "Are you sure this is a good idea, Mom?" Megan asked, eyeing the hidden camera warily. "What if they find out?" I waved a dismissive hand. "They won't suspect a thing. Not with the little act we've cooked up." I shot her a conspiratorial grin. "Just follow my lead. Okay?" She nodded, though the doubt lingered in her eyes. I couldn't blame her. The plan we'd devised to catch Jake and Sarah red-handed was risky, to say the least. But at this point, I was past caring about playing it safe. Those two had taken everything from me. It was time I returned the favor. The doorbell rang, and I took a steadying breath before pasting on a bright, cheery smile. That must be them. Showtime. I flung open the door to find Jake and Sarah standing on the porch, twin expressions of disdain on their faces. "Laura," Jake said, his tone clipped, "I didn't expect to hear from you again so soon." "Well, you know me. I like to keep an open line of communication in this family," I replied breezily. "Speaking of which, I'm so glad you two could come over today. Megan and I have been doing a lot of thinking." Sarah arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Is that so? And what brilliant insights did you come up with this time?" The sarcasm in her voice grated on my nerves, but I refused to take the bait. Not yet, at least. "Why don't you come in and have a seat?" I suggested, gesturing toward the living room. "I'll get us all something to drink, and we can discuss it like the loving family we are." Jake snorted derisively, but allowed me to usher them inside. As I busied myself in the kitchen, I could hear their hushed voices filtering in from the other room, no doubt griping about this little get-together already. Perfect. I returned a few minutes later, a tray of glasses in hand. "Here we are," I chirped, setting it down on the coffee table. "I thought we could start with a nice toast." A toast? Jake eyed the drink suspiciously. To what exactly? To new beginnings, I replied, holding up my glass with a serene smile. I've had some time to think about everything that's happened, and I've realized something important. I paused for dramatic effect. I was wrong to react the way I did. This is your house now, and I need to respect that. Shock flickered across their faces. Clearly, this wasn't the reaction they'd expected. Good. Let them squirm a little. You're being serious? Sarah sputtered. After all that talk about revenge and making us pay? I shook my head sadly. I was just lashing out, saying things I didn't really mean. The truth is, you two were right all along. I'd overstayed my welcome, and it's time for me to move on with my life. I raised my glass again, the picture of sincerity. So, to family and to new beginnings. For a beat, they just stared at me, dumbfounded. Then, like a switch being flipped, their expressions morphed into matching sneers of cruel triumph. Well, well, Jake chuckled darkly, lifting his own glass. I have to say, Laura, I didn't think you had it in you to be reasonable, but I'm glad you've finally seen the light. Sarah clinked her drink against his, that sickly sweet smile never wavering. Yes, this is for the best. After all, we did try to warn you, but you just wouldn't listen, would you? My grip tightened on my own glass as they taunted me, every fiber of my being screaming to wipe those smug looks off their faces. But I held firm, forcing myself to nod and smile through gritted teeth. You're absolutely right, I agreed, the words like ash in my mouth. I should have listened to you both from the start. I'm just so grateful you're giving me another chance. The lies dripped from my tongue like poisoned honey, but it was worth it to see them preen and puff up with self-satisfaction. Megan caught my eye from across the room, giving an almost imperceptible nod. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for them to spring it themselves. The video went viral within hours. I sat on the couch, my phone buzzing incessantly as the shocking footage of Jake and Sarah's cruel taunts spread like wildfire across social media. Megan had worked her tech magic, editing the clips into a damning expose and blasting it out to every corner of the internet. I can't believe how many people have seen this already, she murmured, scrolling through the deluge of comments and shares. The reaction has been insane. I nodded mutely, my gaze fixated on the screen as the video played again. There they were, my beloved husband and his conniving accomplice, sneering and gloating over their betrayal without the slightest shred of remorse. The hurt was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was eclipsed by a burning sense of vindication as the world bore witness to their true ugly natures. My phone chimed again, and I glanced down to see a text from an old friend. Did you see what Laura posted? I'm horrified. Another buzz. Your son and that witch of a wife have some nerve kicking you out like that after everything you sacrificed. The messages kept pouring in, a tidal wave of support and outrage on my behalf. With every notification, I could feel the tide turning in my favor. Well, I murmured, unable to keep the smug satisfaction from my voice. Looks like the masses have spoken. Megan grinned, riding the high of our well-executed plan. I told you this would work, Mom. Now the whole world knows exactly who the real victims are here. As if on cue, my phone started ringing, the caller ID flashing Jake's number. I smirked and hit ignore, letting it go to voicemail as a fresh wave of texts flooded in. How dare they treat you like that? You're handling this with such grace, Laura. Stay strong. If my husband ever pulled something like this, I'd leave him in a heartbeat. With each message, I could practically feel their reputations crumbling beneath the weight of public scorn. The tangible outrage, the unwavering condemnation, it was the ultimate revenge, far more potent than any physical act of retaliation. You know, I mused aloud, I used to worry about what people thought of me and my little kimono business, but this? I gestured to the screen, watching the comments multiply by the second. This is a whole new level of notoriety. Megan laughed, high-fiving me with a mischievous gleam in her eye. Just you wait, Mom. By the time we're through, your name is going to be a household phrase for don't mess with this lady. My phone started ringing again. Sarah's number this time. I rolled my eyes and declined the call, picturing her pacing furiously as the world turned against her. Let her stew in her own misery for a while. As the outpouring of support continued, one thing became crystal clear. Jake and Sarah had made a fatal miscalculation in underestimating me. They'd thought they could cast me aside like yesterday's trash, leaving me powerless and alone. But I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Now I had an entire army rallying behind me, thirsting for justice on my behalf, and they were just getting started. A wicked grin curved my lips as I leaned back, basking in the sweet taste of vindication. "You wanted a war?" I murmured. "Well, you've got one now, and this time I'm not taking any prisoners." The fallout was swift and brutal. Within days of the video going viral, Sarah was called into her boss's office and unceremoniously fired from her cushy marketing job. Apparently, having an employee publicly exposed as a lying, manipulative schemer wasn't great for the company image. "I can't believe this is happening," she'd sobbed into the phone when she called to vent her outrage. "After everything I've done for that company, they're just tossing me aside like garbage." I had to bite back a scathing retort about the irony of her words. Instead, I forced myself to make sympathetic noises, all while savoring the delicious taste of her misery. As for Jake, the dominoes were falling just as rapidly. His golf club terminated his membership, his gambling buddies stopped taking his calls, and the investors in his fledgling business venture began jumping ship en masse. "You've ruined me," he'd roared when he finally deigned to show up on Megan's doorstep, red-faced and eyes wild with impotent rage. "Everything I've worked for gone because of your little temper tantrum." I simply arched an eyebrow, unimpressed by his bluster. "I'm sorry. Are you referring to the house and lifestyle you stole from me through years of deception and theft? Because if so, I'd say you got what you deserved." His face purpled with fury, and for a moment I thought he might actually strike me. But Megan stepped between us, her expression thunderous. "Don't even think about it, Dad," she spat, every inch the protective lioness. "You're the one who made your bed, and now you can lie in it." With an incoherent snarl, Jake turned and stormed away, leaving us both staring after him. Me with grim satisfaction, Megan with a look of utter disgust. "I can't believe I'm actually related to that jackass," she muttered, shaking her head slowly. I reached out and squeezed her hand, a silent gesture of gratitude for her unwavering support. Without her in my corner, I doubt I would have found the strength to take Jake and Sarah down. As the days ticked by, reports of their ongoing downward spiral continued to trickle in. Sarah had been forced to move back in with her parents, her once enviable designer wardrobe and luxury car repossessed to cover her debts. Meanwhile, Jake was drowning in a sea of legal troubles, fending off everyone from jilted investors to the IRS. With each new humiliation they suffered, I felt a deep, primal sense of satisfaction unfurling within me. This was justice, cold and exquisitely merciless, and they had no one to blame but themselves. One afternoon, my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it warily, half expecting another frantic plea for mercy from Jake or Sarah, but the message that awaited me was from an entirely different source. "Mom, it's Kyle. I saw the video and I don't even know what to say. I had no idea Dad and Sarah were capable of something so vile. I'm so sorry." I stared at the words, an uncharacteristic lump forming in my throat. My eldest son, the one who had turned his back on me so callously in the beginning, was finally seeing the truth. As I tapped out a reply, tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but this time they weren't born of sadness or anger. This time they were tears of relief, of redemption, of a mother's love prevailing against all odds. Maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for healing the deepest of family wounds. But as for Jake and Sarah, they'd gotten exactly what they deserved, and I wasn't shedding a single tear for their well-earned misery. The knock at the door was tentative, almost apologetic. I glanced at Megan, who shrugged before crossing the living room to answer it. The sight that greeted me on the other side very nearly took my breath away. There stood Jake and Sarah, looking utterly defeated, a stark contrast to the smug, self-assured personas they'd projected for so long. "Laura," Jake began, his voice little more than a raspy croak. He opened his mouth as if to continue, then seemed to think better of it, gaze dropping to the floor in dejected silence. I studied them for a long moment, taking in the haunted look in Jake's eyes, the way Sarah's once immaculate appearance had deteriorated into unkempt disarray. Part of me felt a perverse thrill at seeing them brought so low. But an even bigger part simply felt tired, bone-deep weary of the never-ending drama and mind games. "What do you want?" I asked at last, keeping my tone carefully neutral. Sarah flinched as if I'd struck her. "We?" She swallowed hard. "We just wanted to see if the stories were true. That you're taking the house back." My lips pressed into a grim line. "Those stories don't even begin to scratch the surface. But yes, it's true. The house is being returned to its rightful owner, thanks to the efforts of some very dedicated people." Something like hope flickered in Jake's eyes. "Laura, please, you have to help us. We have nowhere else to go." "Nowhere else to go," I echoed, arching an incredulous eyebrow. "And whose fault is that, exactly?" The question hung heavy in the air, laden with all the hurt and betrayal of the past several months. Sarah's gaze slid away, fresh shame coloring her cheeks. "We made mistakes," Jake admitted, his voice little more than a hoarse rasp. "Horrible, unforgivable mistakes. But you—" He raised his head, and I was struck by how utterly broken he looked in that moment. "You were my wife, Laura, the love of my life. Doesn't that mean anything to you anymore?" His words wormed their way past my defenses, stirring up embers of the affection I'd once felt for this man. The man he'd been before greed and hubris corrupted him utterly. Despite everything, some small, stubborn part of me still longed for the life we'd once dreamed of sharing. But those embers were banked by a harsh, immutable truth. That life was gone, ashes scattered by the winds of betrayal and deceit. Jake and Sarah had burned that bridge themselves, and I was too old and too weary to rebuild it from the ground up. "It means everything," I said at last, my voice thick. "That's why this hurts so much, Jake. That's why your actions cut me so deeply." I shook my head, blinking back the sting of tears. "But we can't go back. What's done is done. All I can do now is move forward, surrounding myself with the people who truly care about me." My gaze slid to Megan, hovering protectively in the hallway, and the love shining in her eyes gave me strength. Turning back to Jake and Sarah, I straightened my shoulders. "I'm sorry you two find yourselves in this position. But you brought it on yourselves, and those are consequences you're going to have to live with." For a beat, they simply stared at me, twin expressions of devastated disbelief etched across their features. Then, with a broken sound halfway between a sob and a snarl, Sarah whirled and stalked away, leaving Jake to follow in her wake. I watched them go, that bone-deep weariness settling over me once more. A chapter of my life had ended, painful though the parting had been. But as the door swung shut behind them, I felt a strange sense of lightness, of freedom. Crossing the room, I sank onto the couch beside Megan and rested my head on her shoulder, letting the tears come at last. They weren't tears of anguish or bitterness, though. They were tears of release, of rebirth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new beginnings, but for now I simply allowed myself to feel the profound relief of having shed a burden I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. Jake and Sarah were out of my life for good, and strangely, for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt truly at peace. The sun peeked through the curtains, bathing the living room in a warm, golden glow. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the rich aroma and the peaceful quiet of the morning. So much had changed in the past few months, and yet, sitting here, surrounded by Megan and Eric's familiar furnishings, I felt more at home than I had in years. The weight of Jake and Sarah's betrayal no longer pressed down on me, replaced by a sense of liberation I hadn't dared dream possible. "Morning, Mom." Megan shuffled in, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "You're up early." I smiled, patting the spot beside me on the couch. "Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind, I guess." She settled next to me, draping a blanket over our laps. "Everything okay? You're not having second thoughts about—" No, I assured her quickly. "Nothing like that. I'm just thinking about the future for once, about what comes next." Megan's face broke into a grin. "Well, in that case, I've got some good news that might help with those thoughts." My brow furrowed curiously as she grabbed her laptop from the coffee table, tapping away for a few moments before turning the screen to face me. There, in stark digital text, was a real estate listing for a charming little house not far from here, complete with a beautiful sunroom that would be perfect for... "You're not seriously thinking of opening another kimono studio, are you?" I couldn't keep the delight from my voice. Megan shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Well, we can't have you just sitting around collecting dust now, can we? Besides, Everyone could use a few more opportunities for Zen in their lives these days. Tears pricked my eyes as I studied the listing, picturing the space already. The soft lighting, the serene decor, the quiet dignity of my life's passion finally being restored. After everything I'd endured, the idea of reclaiming that part of myself was almost overwhelming. Megan, words failed me for a moment. Thank you for everything. I couldn't have made it through this nightmare without you by my side. She bumped my shoulder affectionately. What are daughters for? Although I have to admit, watching you take down Dad and the Wicked Witch of Westchester was pretty satisfying in itself. We shared a conspiratorial grin, reveling in the memories of our hard-won victories. Jake and Sarah's appalled, ashen faces as the world turned against them would forever be seared into my mind. A small part of me wondered if I should feel guilty for taking such pleasure in their downfall. But the larger part, the part that had spent decades putting their needs and wants above my own, couldn't muster an ounce of remorse. They'd made their choices, and I'd simply ensured they faced the consequences. So, Megan began, bringing me back to the present, what do you think? You ready to dive back into the wonderful world of kimono dressing? I studied the listing once more, drinking in every lovingly captured detail, and felt a surge of excitement I hadn't experienced in far too long. This was my chance to start over, to rebuild the life I'd sacrificed so much for, but on my own terms this time. Meeting Megan's warm, hopeful gaze, I felt a brilliant smile blooming across my face. You know what? I declared, something like my old fire rekindling in my chest. I really think I am. There would be no more compromises, no more settling. The future was a blank canvas, and I was finally free to paint it in whatever bold, vibrant strokes I chose. As I pulled Megan into a fierce hug, I silently thanked whatever cosmic forces had given me the strength to endure the darkness and emerge into the light, ready to seize this new beginning with both hands. The past was over, a closed chapter tinged with hard-won lessons and bittersweet memories. But the future? Well, that was mine for the taking, and this time nothing was going to stand in my way.